Scientists pulled up an animal from 5,500 meters below the ocean surface. An animal that has never seen sunlight, never drifted near a coastline, never shared a water column with a fishing boat, a beach, a city drain, or a human hand. And when they examined its gut, inside a creature that spends its entire life in total darkness, under pressure that would crush an unprotected human instantly, they found plastic. And here's the true part that sounds fake. The animal ate it on purpose, not by accident. Not because it was confused, because the plastic arrived looking and behaving almost exactly like food. It descended through the water column wrapped in the same organic coating as everything else falling from above. And in a place where food is the rarest thing in the world, you don't ask questions. You eat what arrives. So how does plastic, something manufactured in a factory, used once at a surface world convenience store, and tossed, end up inside the gut of a creature at 5,500 meters? How does it move through a food chain that most people don't even know exists? And why does a piece of packaging that took 4 seconds to use now have a residence time at the bottom of the ocean that may be measured in centuries? Imagine the descent. At the surface, you can still see your hand in front of your face. The water is warm, stirred by wind, oxygenated. Life is loud and layered. Sunlight reaches deep enough that photosynthesis is still possible, and the ocean is doing what it's supposed to do, producing, cycling, feeding. Drop 200 meters. The blue sharpens and then dims. Colors begin to disappear one by one. Red goes first, then orange, then yellow. What's left is a cold blue that doesn't comfort you. It filters. Drop 500 meters. You've entered the twilight zone, the mesopelagic, where bioluminescence begins to matter more than sunlight, where the deep scattering layer we explored in a previous episode rises and falls on its daily migration, where the animals carry their own light because the ocean's light is gone. Drop past 1,000 meters. Temperature crashes. The thermocline is behind you now. You're in water that hovers just above freezing, and it has been this temperature for longer than civilization has existed. No sunlight, no warmth, no reference points. The pressure outside the walls of any vessel here is roughly 100 atmospheres, 100 times the weight of the entire sky pressing against every square centimeter of surface. Keep going. At 5,500 meters, you've crossed a threshold. You're not just in the deep ocean anymore. You're approaching the Hadal zone, the ocean's most extreme, most isolated, most inhospitable environment. The trenches, the places where tectonic plates collide and one slides beneath the other, carving canyons into the planet's crust that plunge below 11,000 meters in the deepest reaches. At 5,500 meters, you're standing at the upper entrance of that world. The seafloor here is flat, gray, and almost featureless, a plain of soft sediment built from millions of years of falling particles, dust, dead plankton, shell fragments, mineral grains. And now, mixed invisibly into that sediment, plastic. Not in trace amounts, not as a rare outlier finding, in concentrations that, in some sampled trenches, exceed the levels of plastic found in heavily polluted surface bays near major cities. The deepest, most remote places on the surface of this planet now carry a pollution signature that was not here 60 years ago, and may not leave for 500 more. This is where we are going today. Before we talk about what plastic does at 5,500 meters, we have to understand how it gets there at all. Because the instinct is to picture a plastic bottle sinking. You imagine it glug-glugging down from the surface, tumbling in slow motion through 1.5 miles of open water, eventually settling on the seafloor like a stone. That is not how it works. Most plastics, the lightweight films, the food wrappers, the synthetic fibers shed from a fleece jacket in a washing machine, do not sink on their own. Their density is close to, or lower than seawater. Left alone, they float. They gather in the gyres. They break apart under UV radiation into smaller and smaller fragments, a process called photodegradation, until individual pieces reach the scale of millimeters, then micrometers. Microplastics. Here is where the story changes. At the micro scale, plastic stops being a piece of trash and starts being a surface. Within days of entering the ocean, microplastic particles become colonized by bacteria, algae, diatoms, and organic molecules. They develop a thin biological coating, a living skin, that scientists have named the plastisphere. This coating does two things that matter enormously. First, it changes the particle's weight. The organic matter attached to a microplastic piece increases its density enough that it begins to sink. Second, it changes the particle's smell. The biological coating releases dimethyl sulfide, a compound that, to many marine animals, smells like food, like the ocean surface, like the productive zone where phytoplankton blooms happen. So the particle, now disguised by biology, begins its descent. But it doesn't just fall alone. In the open ocean, there is a constant and gentle downward drift of organic material, dead phytoplankton, shed mucus, fecal pellets from zooplankton, fragments of decomposed animals. This is marine snow. We've touched on it in previous episodes. It is the deep sea's primary food delivery system, the slow-moving nutrient supply chain that keeps everything below the sunlit zone alive. Marine snow falls at roughly a centimeter to a few centimeters per hour, covering the distance from surface to abyssal floor in weeks to months. Microplastics don't fall alone. They fall inside marine snow. They attach to the mucus threads secreted by filter feeders. They get incorporated into the fecal pellets of copepods who ingested them at the surface, not realizing the particle was indigestible, and those pellets sink much faster than loose marine snow, sometimes 100 meters or more per day. This is called the biological pump. And in one of the deepest ironies in ocean science, the same mechanism that makes the deep ocean a functional ecosystem, the elegant conveyor of carbon from surface to floor, is also the delivery vehicle for every microplastic fragment that ends up at 500 meters. The ocean's own physiology is being used against it. Now we arrive at the floor. At 5,500 meters, the sediment is soft. It compresses under the weight of an ROV footpad like wet powder. It has been accumulating for geological time. And now, running through its upper layers are microplastic fibers, fragments, and films, some of them identifiable as polyester, polypropylene, nylon, polyethylene terephthalate, the same materials in your clothing, your water bottle, your food packaging. Here, in the sediment, at the bottom of the ocean. And there are animals living in it. This is the part most people miss because the Hadal zone, the trenches, the ultra-deep, is imagined as lifeless, too cold, too dark, too pressurized, too isolated, but that is wrong. The deep trenches are among the most biologically dense ecosystems on the ocean floor precisely because they are traps. Organic matter that drifts down from above, marine snow, whale falls, biological debris, gets funneled by the V-shaped geometry of the trench walls and accumulates on the trench floor at concentrations far higher than the surrounding abyssal plain. The trench is not a desert. It is a funnel. It is a collecting basin. Everything that falls eventually falls here. And the animals that evolved to live in this collecting basin are specialists built for no other place on Earth. Hadal amphipods, small, shrimp-like crustaceans in the family Lycianacidae, are among the most abundant. They swarm whale carcasses and carrion that sinks to trench floors. They are fast, opportunistic, built for scavenging. They have no eyes in a place with no light. Eyes are dead weight. Their sensory apparatus instead detects chemical gradients, the faint molecular signal of food drifting down from above. What arrives from above now includes plastic-coated marine snow, plastic-wrapped organic particles, plastic embedded in fecal pellets that themselves smell of organic matter. The amphipod's chemical sensors cannot distinguish between a particle coded in organic biology and a plastic particle coded in organic biology. They are the same signal. The plastic arrives wearing the right credentials, and it gets eaten. When researchers from Newcastle University published findings in 2019 from amphipods collected across 6 of the world's deepest trenches, including the Mariana Trench at nearly 11,000 meters, every single sample contained synthetic fibers. Every one. 100% ingestion rate. Fibers identified as rayon, nylon, and polyethylene terephthalate in animals collected from the deepest confirmed point on Earth's surface. The Hadal zone is not clean. It has not been clean for decades. Now we have to talk about what plastic actually does inside these animals. Because ingestion is the beginning of the problem, not the end. Plastic particles themselves are largely inert. A fiber of polyester sitting in a gut does not react chemically, but plastic is not just plastic. During its time at the ocean surface, before it sank, before the plastisphere formed, before it got packaged into a fecal pellet, a microplastic particle was absorbing. Plastic is a sponge for hydrophobic persistent organic pollutants, PCBs, DDT breakdown products, flame retardants, phthalates, industrial lubricants. These compounds don't dissolve well in water, but they dissolve readily into plastic. A microplastic fragment acts like a chemical magnet in the surface ocean, accumulating these substances at concentrations sometimes 1,000,000 times higher than the surrounding seawater. Then it sinks and gets eaten. In the gut, the chemistry shifts. The warm, slightly acidic conditions of a digestive system cause some of these pollutants to transfer out of the plastic and into the body tissue of the animal. The plastic delivers them. It is a Trojan horse that carries a chemical payload across the digestive barrier. The persistent organic pollutants, some of which are known endocrine disruptors, carcinogens, and neurotoxins, are now bioavailable. They enter the bloodstream, the tissue, the fat. The animal doesn't die immediately. It goes on feeding, moving, reproducing, and then it gets eaten. This is where the food chain enters the picture, and where the problem scales in a way that should shift how you think about the phrase deep-sea pollution. The Hadal amphipod is eaten by the Hadal snailfish, Pseudoleparus swirei in the Mariana Trench, the deepest living vertebrate on Earth, filmed alive at 8,336 meters in 2022. The snailfish feeds heavily on amphipods. The persistent organic pollutants that accumulated in the amphipod's tissue are now concentrated further in the snailfish. Because fat-soluble toxins do not pass through, they accumulate. Each step up the food chain magnifies the concentration. This is biomagnification. And it is the same mechanism that caused catastrophic DDT accumulation in eagles and peregrine falcons in the mid-20th century. Except here, it is happening in organisms that exist below the reach of any monitoring program, below the reach of any regulation, below the reach of almost any human awareness. The food chain at 5,500 meters is real. It is structured. It has predators and prey, energy flows, nutrient cycles, the same architecture of dependency you find in any forest or reef. And now running through it, invisible, is a thread of synthetic contamination that didn't exist in this ecosystem 3 generations ago. There is a dimension to this problem that gets almost no attention, and it's possibly the most troubling part. On the surface, plastic degrades. Slowly, but it degrades. UV radiation from sunlight breaks polymer chains. Wave action creates mechanical fragmentation. Certain bacterial communities, particularly in warm, oxygenated coastal environments, have evolved enzymes that can attack specific polymer types. The degradation is too slow to keep up with production, but the mechanism exists. At 5,500 meters, none of those mechanisms function. There is no UV radiation. There is no wave action. The temperature is between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius, and cold dramatically slows the metabolic rate of any degrading microorganism. The pressure affects biochemistry in ways that further reduce enzymatic activity. The deep-sea bacterial communities that exist here evolved over geological time to process organic matter, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, the chemistry of biology. They have no evolutionary experience with synthetic polymers. There is no deep-sea equivalent of the plastic-eating bacteria discovered in recent years at the surface, because deep-sea bacteria have never needed to develop one. Plastic deposited at 5,500 meters does not meaningfully degrade. It compresses. It fragments into smaller pieces under sediment pressure. It gets buried as new sediment accumulates on top of it, but the polymer chains largely remain intact. The chemical structure persists. The pollutant payload remains bound up and bioavailable to any organism that disturbs the sediment or ingests it. Scientists studying sediment cores, vertical cylinders drilled down through accumulated seafloor sediment, have begun detecting a layer of microplastic contamination that acts as a stratigraphic marker, like the iridium layer that marks the mass extinction event 66 million years ago, like the layer of ash from major volcanic events. The beginning of significant plastic contamination in deep-sea sediment corresponds to the 1950s, the dawn of mass plastic production, and that layer is now readable in sediment cores as a distinct and permanent geological signature. We have written ourselves
Competitor
into the
absence.
rock,
Typical
not
midwater
metaphorically,
predators avoid this
in the
depth
sediment,
band. Vampire
in the
squid alone,
geology.
no
The
fantasy.
Anthropocene, the proposed geological epoch defined by human impact on Earth systems, has a physical record
Living
at
in the
bottom
abyssal
of the
zone,
ocean,
the vampire
and
squid
part of
finds
that
safety
record
in
is
scarcity,
plastic.
tolerating depths where
So we
few
have an
others can
animal at
survive.
5,500 meters eating plastic because it can't tell the difference. We have a food chain carrying synthetic chemical contamination upward through biomagnification. We have a polymer that will outlast any human institution currently alive. And we have a geological record confirming that this contamination didn't creep into the abyss, it arrived fast, within a single human lifetime. But here is what this story is really about, and it is bigger than the plastic itself. The deep trenches are not peripheral. They are not footnotes in the story of how the ocean functions. They are end points, the final destinations of the biological pump, the place where carbon removed from the surface atmosphere is ultimately buried and stored. The deep trenches are a significant part of why the ocean sequesters roughly 30% of the carbon dioxide humanity emits every year. The biological carbon pump, marine snow falling, being consumed, respired at depth, drives this storage. It is one of the most important climate-regulating mechanisms on the planet. Anything that disrupts that food web, that degrades the organisms that participate in those energy transfers, that introduces persistent toxins into the bodies that do this work, touches the carbon budget. We do not yet have numbers precise enough to say. Plastic contamination in the Hadal zone is reducing carbon storage by X%. The science is too young, the sampling too sparse, the models too incomplete, but the structure of the risk is clear. You cannot introduce chronic toxicological stress into a foundational food chain without downstream effects. You cannot fill the delivery mechanism of the biological pump, marine snow, with indigestible synthetic fragments and expect every process to continue unchanged.
Prey detection hint. Vampire squid
cannot
eyes focus on drifting
contaminate the
particle
deepest,
cluster. Locks on.
most
Filament
isolated
extends. No laser pointer.
ecosystems on Earth and call it contained. There is no away at the bottom of the ocean. The word doesn't exist down there. Here is the reframe that this story demands. We talk about plastic pollution as a surface problem.
Jet propulsion
We
avoided.
picture sea
Vampire
turtles
squid
and
does not blast
seabirds.
water,
We
emphasizing
picture the
low
Great
energy
Pacific
strategy.
garbage
No
patch.
explosion.
We picture a beach. These are real and they matter, but they are the visible fraction of a problem that has moved far beyond the surface. The plastic problem is now a deep-sea problem, a geology problem, a food chain problem, a climate regulation problem, and the mechanism is not dramatic. No explosion, no oil spill, no visible catastrophe. It is a quiet, continuous accumulation, a daily snowfall of contaminated marine snow drifting down through 5,500 meters of water column arriving at the floor, being eaten by animals with no eyes and no way to refuse cycling through a food web that was old before the first human civilization, and persisting in the sediment long after every structure we have ever built is gone. The vampire squid we talked about in the last episode thrives because it mastered the oxygen minimum zone. It found the place where nothing else could compete and built an entire existence inside that constraint. The bone-eating worms thrive because they found a way to unlock the energy inside the thing everyone else wrote off as spent. The deep scattering layer thrives because it turned the featureless mid-water column into a layered, functioning ecosystem. All of them adapted. All of them evolved answers. Plastic does not adapt. It does not evolve. It does not belong to any ecological logic. It has no function in this system. It arrived as contamination, and it will remain as contamination outlasting the ecosystems it has entered, outlasting the civilization that produced it. Sitting in the sediment at 500 meters as a permanent
food
testament
that
to
predators
the speed
ignore.
at which a single species can alter a system that took 4 billion years to assemble. The scariest thing about plastic at the bottom of the ocean is not that it's there. It's that we put it there in 60 years. If this series is building a real map of the deep ocean, what lives there, how it works, why it matters, then this episode is the one that tells you the map is already changing. The environments we've described in this series, the oxygen minimum zones, the abyssal plains,
In the deep ocean,
whale
the vampire
falls,
squid
the
utilizes its
scattering
unique
layers,
photophores and
all of
specialized
them
webbing.
are downstream from the surface world in ways that are biological, chemical, and now geological. The deep ocean
Waiting
is
for
not
particles.
a separate place. It is a continuation of the same ocean you can see from any coast, just further down, darker, older, and until very recently untouched. That part is over. If you want to keep going deeper into what's actually down there, the real biology, the real chemistry, the real consequences of what we've sent down before us, hit like and subscribe. Every
Running on
episode
fumes.
in this series is built on documented science, not speculation, not horror, not myth. Next episode, we're going to look at what happens when the cold seeps leak methane from the seafloor. How entire chemosynthetic ecosystems live off a gas that is literally warming the planet above them. And what that tension between geological release and biological consumption tells us about the ocean's future. It sounds impossible. It's completely real.